and welcome to Smarter, Richer, Braver, the podcast that's specially curated for you, a generation of young people who want to step up, stand out, and live life on their own terms. A generation who aim to do better, not just for themselves, but for humanity as a whole. A generation who aim to be smarter, richer, and braver, because that's exactly what the world today needs. I'm your host, Marilyn Pinto, author and founder at KFI Global, and I'd like to warmly welcome all you Gen Zers. A special shout out to all our KFI Global students listening in. Please know that this podcast was made with you in mind, and I promise it's going to be worth your attention.
This podcast is strictly for those 25 years and younger. If you are older than that, please listen at your own risk. Common side effects include regret and anger for not having heard this earlier in your life.
Going off to college. That's a time many of you are eagerly looking forward to. It marks the beginning of a new and exciting journey of independence, of self-discovery, and of learning. Yet, this journey is undoubtedly challenging. Deciding which colleges to apply to and then having to navigate the intricate web of applications, standardized tests, and personal statements can be downright overwhelming. And that's not even taking into account the weight of parental expectation, the financial ramifications you will have to consider, and the emotional toll of uncertainty about acceptance. Here to help you with all of this is Brennan Barnard. He is the Director of College Counseling at Khan Schools Network, California. He is also the College Admissions Program Advisor with the Making Caring Common, a project of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, among so much else he does. A contributing writer for Forbes.com, he has written about college admission for the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and a host of other reputed publications. His book, The Truth About College Admission, is a wonderful read full of fascinating insights, and I highly recommend it. I know that his knowledge and expertise will be immensely useful as you undertake this important journey and will help you lead a life that's smarter, richer, and braver. Welcome to the podcast, Brennan.
Thanks for having me.
Brennan, what do you think are some of the common myths that students have around college admissions?
First of all the students are going to think I've lost my mind, but it can actually be joyful. It can be complicated and overwhelming and everything. But I think that's the biggest myth, is it doesn't have to be. I think oftentimes students approach this as something that's, I just got to get through it, right? Like, here comes college admission. How do I survive it? It doesn't have to be that way. It can be a real time, like you said, of opportunity, of excitement, of meaning, of connection. So I think that's the biggest myth. I think the other myth is that it's so hard to get into college. The truth is actually the majority of colleges accept more applicants than they deny. The average admit rate for colleges and universities in the US hovers around 75%. This kind of idea that it's impossible to get into college is one of the biggest myths. I'd say 100 different colleges and universities where it's super selective and it's going to be tough to gain admittance. But the truth is that there are a lot of options and a lot of possibility.
Where do you want to go to college? That's a question that's commonly asked of teens. But in your book, you say that there is a more important question that should be asked. What is it, and why is it so significant?
Well, I think why is the biggest question that students should ask, right? Oftentimes, we enter into the college search of where should I go and what should I study and how do I get in? And those where, what's, and hows are important, but not until you really step back and do some self-reflection. So I think it's important for students, before they jump in and get too far down the road, to stop and say, okay, why am I doing this? What do I want to get out of the experience? Who am I as a person? And what are my hopes for this? And that why is not something that is going to be static. It's not something that's going to be the same the whole time. It's going to shift as they go along. But I think taking the time aside to ask that question again and again is important, and to discuss it with family and friends. If you have family members that went to college, why did they go to college? And how can that help you understand what you want?
And asking why, how does this help them narrow their search? Does it help them narrow their search?
Yeah, because if you come up with, I am going to college, the reason I'm going to college is to become an engineer, then that why drives their mission and drives the type of schools they're going to look at and where they're going to look. If their why is that they want to be immersed in a diverse community of learners, that's going to explain the type of school and the type of community they engage with.
So it essentially guides their choice around colleges, and that
Yeah,
will help them
exactly.
make a better
Yeah.
decision.
Yep, absolutely.
There are a lot of youngsters who find it challenging to discuss college plans with parents. Could you
Mm.
take us through some of the communication wedges you describe in your book and give them some pointers on what they should and shouldn't do when talking to their parents about the college admission process?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of two ways this can go, right? College admission can bring a family together and it can also divide a family, right? And so we do talk about these wedges in college admission in our book. The first one is finances. So we really encourage students and parents to talk about money at the very beginning of their process. Like, how much is affordability going to play a part in the college search? Are there certain restrictions that families are going to place on the types of schools a student can go to based on their family's ability to pay? And so having those honest conversations about what the family can afford and what they're willing to afford are important at the very outset. So that's one. Time is another, and that is the idea that the college admission experience can bleed into all aspects of your family life if you let it. And so compartmentalizing college admission to one part of your life rather than have it be this ongoing conversation of
So you
like,
mean set a time for it, set a time to
yeah,
discuss this?
yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important we have communication about college, but I don't want to do it all the time. Like, I don't want to come down to breakfast and be sabotaged by you saying, "Oh, have you studied for the SAT or have you looked at these colleges?" And it becomes this constant. And I have two children, I'm a senior in high school and a sophomore in college, and we went through this as well. It kind of takes over your life. And so take an hour a week or half an hour a week, whatever it might be, and set that time aside and just have that be the time you talk about college.
So an hour a week is what you recommend in term. I know it's ballpark,
Uh,
but that should
yeah,
be around.
yeah, it depends on where you are in the process. I think for like juniors or students who are younger who are just starting out their search, it doesn't have to be every
Correct.
week and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to, but as you get into senior year, you're probably
Yeah.
going to want half an hour a week just to sit down and talk more seriously about the search.
And I guess here this brings us to creating a college list, right? How do
Mm.
students tackle this?
I mean, once they've decided on what they're hoping for in a college, ideally they start doing some research. And if they can visit schools, visit them. If they can at least do them in virtual visits, so they start to get an idea of what each school offers. And start by exploring schools of different sizes and different shapes and different specialties and things like that. So you can start to identify specific things you liked or didn't like about a school and take good notes. And then start to narrow down your criteria.
Is there a number of schools that should be on such a college list? I know you talk about reach schools and things like that. Could you take us through that a little?
Yeah, I think about 6 to 12 schools is probably reasonable. This has shifted over time. It used to be less, but I think it's a little different. I think when you get up to college lists of 15, 20, 30 schools, I think you're just not doing your research. You're not being intentional. You should have one or two schools that are more likely that you think you'll pretty good chance of getting into. Some people call them foundation schools. And so maybe two, one, two, three of those schools, and then a big chunk in the middle, right? Like 3 to 5 schools where you kind of a 50-50 shot that are kind of target schools. And then maybe two or three reach schools,
When you say reach schools,
schools that are more selective than your profile. So where your grades and your test scores and your profile are lower than what they usually accept. And to be honest, any school with an acceptance rate of single digits or under 15% is a reach school for anyone, no matter your profile.
I'd actually like to circle back to the communication wedges, if you please, just because about how kids should be talking to their parents about this
Mm.
particular process, because I know that this is a time that's completely fraught with fear and uncertainty, and it comes out in
Yeah.
so many different ways. Is there anything that you see students usually do that you'd recommend against? I think that's an easier way to go about it.
I think sometimes students kind of shut down. They respond to their parents. I mean, your parents love you. Like that's just the plain old fact, right? And sometimes it drives us as parents, because I am one, drives us to do crazy things, right? And to react what seems irrationally to you. But it's because we have great hopes for you and we have great fears for you. I think talking with your parents about what your hopes and fears are for college admission and what theirs are as well is really a good place to start. And also just understand that where they're coming from is a place of love, but also your response to the way they're acting makes a real difference. So you could totally withdraw and withhold information from them. I don't recommend that because it drives that wedge even further. But sit down with them and just say, listen, this is how I'm really feeling about this. And when you say this, when you make comments about this school on my list, this is how it makes me feel. And, colleges, it's different from when you might have looked at colleges. This is how your actions are making me feel.
I know this podcast is particularly curated for students, but could you maybe just take us through a few of the mistakes that parents make when it comes to this conversation, just so the kids know that,
Yeah.
okay, maybe we can bring this up, or this is a red flag that we can maybe talk
Yeah.
about. I
Yeah.
think it might be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think our feelings as parents, our anxiety about our kids' future, we want them to, like I said, we love our children and we want them to do well and we want them to be secure and safe. And all of our anxiety about our kids and their future gets kind of funneled into what we think we can control. And that is college admission for a lot of people. They think like, oh, if I can just control my kid's future, then they'll be all right. So that's why we get so fixated on this process and get so fixated on college. But I think parents need to also understand that a lot of the way they think about college is outdated. It's based on maybe what we experienced when we were our kids' age. And it's just shifted, it's shifted time and time again. It's shifted in the last year. And I think students need to understand that their parents are often dealing with outdated information, and parents need to also be able to check their ego at the door and understand that where their kid goes to college is not a reflection of them and their parenting or anything like that. And students need to understand that where they go to college is not a reflection of their self-worth. If you don't get into a college, it doesn't mean you're not good enough, or it doesn't mean you're not a strong student or anything. It just means there are a lot of students applying to that school, and for whatever reason, they have different priorities.
This podcast isn't meant to entertain you. It's meant to help you do life better by showing you how to think about and navigate important issues that aren't usually talked about to youngsters. But we believe that you need to hear this because it has the potential to change your life and the lives of other young people like you. So please share this episode with someone you care about, and if you haven't already, please hit the follow button. It helps us get these meaningful insights and messages in front of more youngsters.
You mentioned something. You said parents do this because we feel that the choice of college will control their future.
Hmm.
Can you delve a little bit into that? Is that true?
No, I think it's more about how the student goes into the college experience and what they do and the opportunities they take advantage of. So it is less about the specific college that a student goes to and more about what they do when they get there. But sometimes we lose sight of that. And parents, I think, again, parents are also, you have to understand your parents are kind of caught up in their peer group, right? And like what other parents are
Societal
saying.
norms, yeah.
Yeah, they're colleagues at work, and so they are reacting to that. And so sometimes we have to set our ego aside and think more about like, okay, what is right for my student, for me as a student, and for my my mental health, my wellness, my learning, all those things.
College visits. These are always an exciting time. What advice do you have for our listeners on how they can make the most of these visits? Any particular aspects that they should focus on?
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely do the official college visit. Don't just drive through and walk around on your own. Go and do the tour and everything like that, because some schools will kind of make note of that, and they'll, when you apply for admission, that will be a factor. They'll want
Oh,
to
so
know that
it shows as an expression of interest if you do
yeah,
be able
demonstrate
to.
interest that you
Mhm.
right. But then also, in addition to that official visit, take enough time to really explore on your own. I like to tell students to go sit in the student center or the dining hall or wherever students gather. Just watch how students interact. Does everybody have their headphones on? Are their heads buried in their phone? Are they talking to each other? Are they engaging? Just try to get a sense for the culture of a community. Pick up the student newspaper to see what hot topics are on that campus. If you know you're interested in a certain academic area, go to that department and look around, look and see what kind of research is maybe up on the wall, see what kind of opportunities they're advertising. Stop by and see if a professor is available just to say hi. Those kinds of things that really give you a sense. And then also ask good questions, right? Ask questions of everyone you meet. Don't just ask a question to a tour guide and take that as gospel. Go and ask questions to the tour guide, but also to a random student you meet on campus and to a professor and to an alum, and see if those answers to the questions all match up, or are they really different? And what does that tell you about the school?
Can you give our listeners just a sample of some questions? For example, I know you have quite a lot of them in your book, but can you just
Yeah.
give up a few examples?
Yeah. Things like, what would you change about your school? What do you love about your school? I really like asking students to, I say, complete this sentence. Thank you, X college for giving me blank. And thank you, Barnard College, for giving me the opportunity to do this or whatever, and just see what they say. Again, it really depends on what your criteria are and what's important to you. That's going to drive your questions.
Mhm.
But I like asking students what their understanding for the mission of the college is, if the college is living their mission as a school, things like that.
Okay. Brings us to college rankings, always a loaded topic. How much weightage should students give this? And how can they avoid
Zero.
being
I,
and how
you,
can they
you-
avoid being overly influenced by rankings and focus on factors, that truly matter to their personal and academic growth? But I like your answer of zero. So let's carry on from
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
zero.
you won't find a bigger critic of rankings than me. I mean, it just makes no sense to me to have other people tell you what's good for you, right? And
Yeah.
so I think if you're going to look at rankings, understand why you're looking at them and what
And
really,
maybe understand what they rank.
yeah, what they rank and how they rank them. Like, what's the methodology? Like, U.S. News and World Report, 20% of the ranking is based on reputation, and that reputation is developed by surveys they send out to other schools about that college. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? And so understand what you're looking at, and also ask yourself, why are you looking at it? Why does it matter to you?
I know we spoke about this earlier, but I'd really like to come back to the topic of family finances because I think it's one of the most important discussions that students should have with their parents. But like all things
Absolutely.
money, it's tiptoed around and fraught with fear and uncertainty. And in your book, you say when making one of the first significant adult decisions, students should be privy to the expense and implications of their college choice. I'd love you to delve a little more into this.
Yeah. I would say to students, ask your parents straight up from the start, what can we afford as a family? If I get into any college, if I get into the college of my choice, can we afford to send me there if I want to go? If the answer is no, then the question should be, how should we approach this? Right? Am I going to qualify for financial aid? Are we going to qualify as a family for financial aid? There's net price calculators that will tell you on each college's website how much you're likely to get in financial aid if you're a domestic US citizen. And some schools for international students, some schools do offer aid for international students, others don't. So being really clear about that. And then talking to your family about, okay, what are we willing to pay for this, right? Like, if this means selling a second house or if this means putting off these other family priorities, are we willing to do that or are we not willing to do that? And if I get into two colleges and one's a lot less expensive, is it am I going to go to that one? Like, how much of this is my choice as a student and how much is it a family choice? And then having conversations about, okay, what are my long-term goals? Like maybe I already know I want to go to graduate school. So how is that going to impact things? Like if I go to a less expensive undergraduate education, are we going to have money left over to send me to graduate school? Or so having all those conversations and really getting into it and kind of opening up the books. I think it's an incredible learning opportunity.
Could you talk our listeners through the two kinds of admissions review processes in college, the
Yeah.
formulaic review and the holistic review?
So formulaic review is often bigger public schools, state public schools, and things like that. It's really just by the numbers. They set the bar at a certain level. If you have a GPA or test scores or your certain criteria that meet this bar that we've set or are exceeded, then you're admitted.
So
In
it's
some
very numeric.
schools,
It's
it's very
straightforward.
numeric. And some schools will even have a calculator on their website that allows you to go on there and enter your information and says you will be a good candidate for this campus of our university system. And so it's very kind of by the numbers. Holistic admission, and it's usually schools that have lower acceptance rates that it's supply and demand. If they have too much demand for the supply they have, if they have too many applicants for the spots they have, then they can't just take it by numbers. They couldn't take everyone that has a certain GPA, right? Because they don't have that many spots. And so they then look at other aspects of the application. And that includes essays and recommendations and extracurricular involvement and all these other pieces of students' application and profile.
The personal statement, right? That's an important part of the college admission process. And students typically get a lot of guidance on this particular aspect. But
Yeah.
what, in your opinion, are the biggest mistakes that students make in writing their personal statements?
Yeah. I think increasingly the big mistake that students make is using AI, right? Like allowing AI to write your recommendation or your essay, not a good call. But also just getting too much input on it. I think it's good to get feedback on your essay. Absolutely. Anybody who does any kind of writing should get feedback on their writing.
Yeah.
But I think anybody who's a writer also needs to be worried about losing their voice and losing the point that they're trying to make in somebody else editing their essays. College admission officers can tell when an essay is written by a 45-year-old and not an 18-year-old. Don't allow someone to rewrite your essay or to steer you in a direction that you don't want to go and retain control of your own writing.
There must be some pointers or some guidelines, though, that you think from all your experience that would get the attention of the admission committee. Can you give us some of that?
I think
Or
that's
is that
dangerous.
really variable?
Yeah, I think it's variable, and I think it's dangerous to try too hard to get attention. I think that's where students go wrong is they enter it trying to like, how can I stand out? And then they don't focus on their voice. Like think about the story you want to tell.
But
And
sorry,
then
but isn't that the point of maybe I'm wrong, like to stand out from the other applicants?
yes and no, right? The point of the essay is for them to get to know you. In holistic admission is for them to get to know you as an applicant. It's not to like kind of shock and awe them. They want to know that you're a good writer, but they also want to get to know you. And if they get to know you, that is inherently going to make you stand out. I guess that's what I'm saying. Like start from there and let that make you stand out rather than starting from I want to stand out and how do I do that? It's an intention thing.
So you're saying just be authentic and talk to them as though really.
Yeah, don't focus too much on the prompts at first.
Okay.
Focus on, okay, here's my application. Here's who I am. What don't they know about me? And how can I tell them about that in this essay?
The personal interview is another key step in the admission process.
Yeah.
What
For some schools.
suggestions?
For some schools.
Okay.
There are a lot of schools that don't do interviews,
All right.
especially a lot of bigger schools that, they just don't have the time or space to do that many interviews.
Okay,
But
but
for
if it is part of the process, any suggestions that you can give the students in terms of how to go about this?
Yeah, Rick Clark, my co-author, and I just actually had a podcast about this week about interviews with Gloria Crawford, who is the co-founder of a group called Initial View that
Mhm.
focuses on interviews. And I would encourage people to listen to that, but then it's really again about telling your story, about not trying to over prepare. She talks a lot about kind of over preparing for an interview and then just not being authentic and compelling. And so It's really just a conversation, and it shouldn't be something that's like daunting, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be perfect in this interview? It really is just a conversation with somebody for them to get to know you better.
Are there any questions that you think the students should ask at the interview? I know that they should ask some, but anything that you think that they should, be sure to include?
I think they should ask about what the interviewer sees as some of the biggest issues that students are struggling with on campus, or what is the relationship, between what a student wants to study and the opportunities they have to explore that outside the classroom, like kind of those high impact practices,
Mhm.
things that they can't just, not things like, do you have a biology major or how many students go here, or, like not things you can find easily on their website.
That makes sense. With regard to extracurricular activities, students oftentimes feel they need to have done it all so that they'll come across as well rounded to colleges. What's your opinion on this?
I would say that is not a good way to approach it, right? This is not a thing where you're just trying to build your resume to show them how many things you've done. They are really looking at this idea of, how involved have you been in something? Have you really given it some time and energy? So, how have you been involved? What impact you've had? So, what has your role been? Did you just kind of show up to a club and just attend and sit around? Or did you make an impact? And what influence did you have on other people as well? What ways did you think about the influence you could have on the greater community or on the group that you're working with? Don't try to think about just showing them all the many things you did, but why you did them.
So it's not just about listing down all your activities and
Right.
your designations in the clubs. It's more about,
Right.
I think in the book you say impact is about depth and longevity. Am I
Yep.
saying that correct? Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And that's how they would look at it in terms of how deep have you gone into in that particular subject or that particular
Right.
activity.
So listing 10 activities doesn't mean much if you didn't really go into depth in any of them. If you went into depth in two activities and that really shows and your passion for that activity and that interest shine through, then that's going to say a lot more about you than you kind of dabbled in 10 different things.
Any advice or insights on letters of recommendation?
Yeah, again, I would look at your overall application and then what voices have not been shared with them. So, what aspects of you have not been shared? And so, think about your role in the classroom and where you've been proud of the work you've done, and ask a teacher who knows you well and knows you and your role in group work and your role in individual projects and things like that, and have them write. If you struggled in a certain course, and have kind of stayed with it and persisted and overcome a challenge, even if you don't, it doesn't have to be the classes where you got the straight A's. It
Straight
could be a
A's.
class where the teacher can talk about how hard you worked.
Makes sense. And the letters of recommendation, are they usually recommended to be from your teachers and guides?
Yeah, yeah. You should plan on having at least two teacher recommendations from teachers who've taught you in the classroom from junior and senior year in high school. Some schools limit the number of recommendations you can submit, but
Mhm.
then sometimes some schools allow for a supplemental recommendation, and so you might include one from a employer or a coach or a director or something like that.
I particularly love the last chapter in your book where you ask students to do something. Can you talk our listeners
Mm.
through this and why it's important?
Yeah, we ask students and parents to write each other a letter about what their hopes are and what their fears are, and reflect on the experience, and to show gratitude to each other and plan for the future. And I think it's just, again, we center our whole book around engaging in this experience as a family, however you define family.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the culmination of it, is writing each other a letter.
What message would you like to give our listeners?
Enjoy this. First of all, be good high school students. Don't let college admission drive everything you do in high school. Do the things you love in high school and let that drive college admission. Don't get to freshman, sophomore year in college and look back and say, oh man, I stressed for the whole last 2 years of high school about college, and I missed out on all these experiences I could have had. Because the truth is, you could do everything and anything throughout the next couple years in high school and still not get into your dream college. Do you want it to be all about college, or do you want it to be about the experiences you've had and then matching those experiences to the opportunities that lie ahead?
Wow, that's such a fantastic message, Brennan. Thank you for your time and for your
Oh, thanks
expertise
for having me.
and just for the way you explained everything. I know this is going to be super helpful. So thank you again for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you for listening. I want to help you use what you learned here. And the best way to do that is to get a podcast buddy. That's someone who also listens to this podcast. Then talk to your podcast buddy about the one takeaway from this episode that resonated with you the most. That's it. That's all you have to do. Remember that much of what is talked about on this podcast is stuff that's not typically talked about to young people, and it should be. It's stuff that you need to know so that you can lead a life that's, you guessed it, smarter, richer, and braver. This is your host, Marilyn Pinto, signing off. Until next time.
If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to broach in our upcoming episodes, please email us at smarterricherbraver@gmail.com. And if you'd like to sign up for one of our award-winning programs, go to kfi.global and check out our upcoming schedule.